Why write? Obviously, this is a very subjective question and it will vary from person to person. But I wanted to ask you the question and I wanted to consider the question myself because I think it raises the idea that we aren't just writing as if it's something we might do for a grade in your case, or something I might do for tenure or money in my case. But instead, the question why write, I think, pushes deeper and hopefully touches those parts of us um, that say, I write because I cannot help but write. Writing is a very deep and intense part of my existence, and I can't imagine living without writing. That is how I would like for you to see writing, mainly because it's so exhilarating. When you do say, I am a writer, I write almost every day, I see the world as a writer sees the world. When that happens, and I imagine it would happen for a musician or a painter too, when that happens, suddenly your life becomes much more interesting than it was before. So, why write? I want you to ask yourself that question, and hopefully, the answer will start you on a path to understanding how you might ultimately equate your being with writing. So, I thought that I would offer three reasons for why I write. Three of many, but these three are the most pertinent, I think, and they came to me today. They came to me just now. And hopefully, the language I use in describing these three reasons I love to write um, will give you a language for thinking about why you love to write. Well, let me first say, before I talk about why I love to write, writing is also very painful. Writing is also uh, wrenching with insecurity, vulnerability. It's really easy not to be a writer, just as it's really easy not to be a painter, just as it's really easy not to do anything that really taxes you. But the sacrifice you make for in your security, in your sense of self, will be worth the rush you will get, I suggest, when you do write that sentence just like you like it, when you do get that paragraph just like you want it, when you do write that essay that just turns you on for days on end, then the sacrifice will have been worth it. Well, that's the hard part. But there's so many lovely parts of writing. The first reason I think I write is that I just love the sound of words. They're music to me. And this goes back a long time to being a child and loving nursery rhymes. Hey, diddle, diddle, the cat and the fiddle, the cow jumped over the moon. Those nursery rhymes really get at what makes language the most powerful for me. The sound of language that affects you bodily before your mind can even go to work on the meaning of the piece, whether it be a poetry piece or a prose piece. I remember in high school reading Macbeth and the way the witches talked. Their bubbles and toils and troubles. It's almost like a kind of meaningless gibberish, but it sounded lovely. And then the way they would talk about a rump fed rumpkin, incredible sound effects. Love that stuff. And so some of the poets that I latched onto first when I was in college, I guess, would be poets that are most successful as not most successful, but that are very successful as sound makers. You can think of William Butler Yeats in particular, the Lake Isle of Innisfree. I will arise and go now and go to Innisfree, and a small cabin build there of clay and wattles made. Or the Song of Wandering Angus. I went out to the hazelwood because a fire was in my head, and cut and peeled a hazel wand and hooked a berry to a thread. That sing songiness. But of course, for me, the most musical poem of all is Coleridge's Kubla Khan in Xanadu did Kubla Khan a stately pleasure dome decree, where out the sacred river ran through caverns measureless to man, down through the sunless sea. So twice 5 miles of fertile ground with walls and towers were girdled round, and so on and so forth. So when I write, more and more, the word choices that I make are less based on the meaning I want to and more based on the sounds I want my sentences to make. this can lead you. This can lead you to the next word. Not what word do I need to express my intention, but what word sounds best beside the word I just laid out. It's a really great way to keep pushing forward with a piece of writing. The second reason I think I like writing is I love how my head feels when I'm really deep into a writing project, when I really just can't stop thinking about it, when I'm just obsessed with it, when I feel almost like I'm a deep sea diver down in the murky greenish depths, and that's where I want to be, just trying to look for lights and flashes and fins and caverns. And when I am pulled out of my writing project, my writing time, I feel like a diver who gets the bends, who's come up too quickly into the oxygen. That's how it feels. It's an immersive experience. And yes, does it isolate me from others? It does. Does it keep me from sleeping well? It does. But the hum in my head when I'm really thinking hard about writing is exquisite, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. And finally, I think the reason I write is the world's just more interesting when you're a writer. If you see the world with writerly eyes, your ears are always perked up for that strange bit of speech you overhear that you might put into your work, or that weird image that you might see in a junkyard or wherever. Just suddenly, because everything is potentially raw material for what you write, potentially everything is interesting. And someone once said, a writer is someone for whom everything is interesting. And I think that's true. So life's boring. Life's very boring. It is. And it gets more boring the older you get in some ways, because routine can really take over and encrust your behavior. But writing pushes against that. It keeps you fresh. It makes the familiar world seem unfamiliar. It makes the unfamiliar world seem familiar. And we live in a kind of dynamic limbo between the familiar and the unfamiliar when you're living the writerly life. And that means that life can always be very charged for you. So those are 3 reasons I write. Why don't you think of your own?